My husband dropped his financial binder onto our kitchen island with a loud thud. His expression was cold and calculating, eyes narrowed with obvious self-satisfaction. "Beginning this month, we handle our own money separately, Colleen," he declared, his tone carrying the kind of arrogance that fills a room. "I'm exhausted from carrying your weight while you coast on my efforts. Going forward, my earnings are mine alone and yours are yours. We divide every household expense right down the middle, or you can pack your things and leave." Seated across from him, my mother-in-law poured herself a fresh cup of coffee, a thin, self-satisfied smile creeping across her face. She never spoke a single word, but her expression said everything. The two of them were convinced they had finally cornered me. They expected tears, pleading, and apologies for a financial dependency that never actually existed. Instead, I quietly set my book aside, met my husband's gaze directly, and responded with a composed smile. "Honestly, Julian, I think that's a brilliant idea," I answered without missing a beat. "Let's make it effective immediately." He stood there visibly confused, clearly unprepared for how eagerly and cheerfully I'd accepted his ultimatum. He had no clue that his smug little declaration was precisely the opening I had been patiently waiting for. He was under the impression he was liberating himself from a financially dependent housewife. What he had no way of knowing was that by insisting our finances remain entirely separate, he had just surrendered his only connection to a multi-million-dollar empire and sealed his own financial destruction. My name is Colleen, I'm 26 years old, and until fairly recently, I genuinely believe my marriage to Julian was grounded in real partnership and mutual respect. We crossed paths when I was 22, at a point when Julian was a driven but insecure mid-level corporate professional desperately seeking validation from his wealthy and deeply judgmental family. His mother, Eleanor, was a woman draped in designer clothes and layered in passive aggression. From the very first dinner Julian brought me to at her immaculate, emotionally cold estate, Eleanor made it her personal crusade to remind me of my place in the social hierarchy. In her eyes, I was nothing more than a struggling freelance graphic designer from a modest background who had somehow conned her precious son into providing her with a comfortable lifestyle. Julian, deeply insecure and obsessively eager to meet his mother's elitist expectations, gradually allowed her toxic influence to distort his perspective. Over time, he stopped seeing our relationship as a partnership built on love and began viewing it as a financial arrangement in which he was perpetually being taken advantage of. The situation finally reached a breaking point on a Tuesday evening when he slapped his financial ledger onto our kitchen island. His jaw was tight with smug finality. Eleanor sat right beside him, nursing her tea with a sharp, victorious expression etched across her face. Julian looked down at me and delivered the words that fundamentally changed the course of everything between us. "Starting this month, our money is separate. I'm done supporting you." He was entirely convinced he was constructing a clever trap to humble his dependent wife. He had absolutely no idea he was walking straight into mine. Julian moved quickly to enforce his new financial rules with an almost vindictive precision. The very next morning, a notification appeared on my phone. He had built a shared digital spreadsheet titled Household Realignment. From that point forward, our shared life was reduced to cold calculations and petty arithmetic. Julian demanded we divide every single utility bill, the mortgage, property taxes, and even our streaming subscriptions into exact halves down to the very last cent. If a light bulb needed replacing in the hallway, he would enter the $1.50 cost and expect 75 cents transferred to him before the weekend ended. The real cruelty, however, surfaced in the small and intimate moments of daily life. To reinforce his perceived financial dominance and humiliate me, Julian stopped taking me out to restaurants entirely. He began preparing elaborate, expensive organic meals exclusively for himself, stocking the upper shelves of the refrigerator with premium cuts of meat and high-end wines that he explicitly declared off limits for me. I was left to shop for my own groceries separately, carefully stretching a modest budget for staple items while sitting across from him at our dining table, watching him smirk as he carved into a prime ribeye steak. Through all of it, I performed my role with absolute perfection. I let my shoulders drop with visible stress, sighed over my packed lunches, and allowed him to believe that his sudden financial withdrawal was chipping away at me. In reality, I was enjoying every single moment of the performance. While Julian was sitting there color-coding a $4.50 shared paper towel charge on his precious spreadsheet, he was entirely blind to the fact that my freelance graphic design business had quietly transformed into a thriving, full-scale digital branding agency. I was generating more revenue in a single week than he earned across an entire year, and I was systematically transferring those corporate profits into a private business account with no connection to our shared finances. As I sat at my modest little desk, watching him highlight that petty paper towel expense, it struck me just how completely greed can consume a person's judgment. He was so absorbed in his little power trip that he completely missed the quiet confidence behind my eyes. Before I continue revealing how his arrogant scheme spectacularly unraveled, let me take you back to the bigger picture of what was really happening beneath the surface. The silent storm was building right inside our home, and Julian was marching straight toward a financial catastrophe entirely of his own design, without the faintest awareness of what was coming. The full scope of the situation became clearer with every passing day, as the gap between our financial realities widened dramatically. Julian remained completely convinced I was drowning under the weight of shared expenses, but the reality was far more extraordinary. The business he had dismissed as a minor freelance side project had evolved into a highly successful and rapidly growing digital branding agency that I had built entirely on my own initiative. Over the course of 2 years, I had deliberately kept the company's explosive growth private, operating behind a structured corporate entity. I had wanted to know, without any doubt, whether Julian truly valued me as a person, or whether his family's toxic obsession with social status and wealth would ultimately destroy our marriage. His petty little spreadsheet handed me a definitive, unambiguous answer. At the exact moment things at home were reaching peak tension, a major technology conglomerate approached me with a formal offer, a $3.2 million cash buyout for my agency. While I was quietly reviewing acquisition contracts alongside my corporate legal team, Julian was busy making one of the most catastrophic financial decisions of his life. Driven by a desperate need to outperform everyone around him and finally prove to his mother that he was some kind of financial genius, he acted on a tip passed along by his arrogant older brother. Julian made the decision to liquidate his entire life savings, combine it with a substantial personal loan, and pour everything into a volatile and completely unverified tech startup. He was utterly convinced this investment would launch him into an entirely different financial stratosphere and give him the ultimate leverage to look down on me permanently. He moved through our home with an insufferable air of supreme confidence, completely blind to the fact that he was gambling his entire future on a sinking ship, while my confidential multi-million-dollar transaction was quietly being finalized on the other side of the city. 6 months into our rigid financial arrangement, the carefully constructed illusion Julian had built around himself imploded in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. The unstable tech startup he had staked his entire life savings on collapsed overnight as a result of systemic internal fraud. This was not a minor financial setback or a temporary dip in value. Julian's accounts were completely wiped out, and he was left buried under an enormous and suffocating mountain of personal loan debt with no safety net in sight. Desperate to preserve the appearance of wealth and success in front of his domineering mother and brother, he approached me in the kitchen one evening, clearing his throat awkwardly. For the first time in months, his practiced arrogance had completely evaporated as he quietly tried to ask me for a personal loan to cover his upcoming share of the mortgage. I didn't hesitate for a single moment. I simply pulled up his own household realignment spreadsheet on my screen, looked him directly in the eyes, and held him firmly to his own terms, gently reminding him that what was mine and what was his was his. To properly mark the official completion of my multi-million-dollar corporate acquisition, I decided it was time to arrange one final, unforgettable act. I casually extended an invitation to Julian, Eleanor, and his extended family for a celebratory dinner at the most prestigious 5-star restaurant in the city. I deliberately let them assume that Julian was the one hosting and covering the entire evening, giving his badly bruised ego one last opportunity to bask in the glow of his family's admiration before the inevitable collapse arrived. When that lavish dinner concluded, the waiter glided smoothly to our table and presented a bill that was nothing short of staggering. Julian accepted the leather folder, opened it, and visibly drained of all color, his eyes stretching wide in barely contained panic as he stared at a total that far exceeded anything his overdrawn account could possibly cover. Eleanor, still completely unaware of the financial wreckage her son was buried under, loudly announced to everyone at the table, "Julian is the man of the house. He always takes such wonderful care of this family." I smiled warmly, reached into my bag, and withdrew a signed copy of their meticulously enforced financial separation agreement alongside a set of completed divorce papers. I placed my exact portion of the dinner bill in cash on the table, calculated to the last penny, along with my precise half of that month's shared household expenses. Then I calmly slid the remaining overwhelming bill directly in front of Julian. I turned to face the stunned group and quietly revealed the full truth of my financial situation, informing them that my agency had just been acquired for several $1,000,000. Every single person at that table went completely still. The weight of their own self-inflicted consequences settled over the room as Eleanor's jaw dropped in disbelief and Julian came to the devastating realization that his obsessive little math exercise had left him with absolutely nothing. The divorce proceedings that followed were efficient, precise, and utterly devastating for Julian on every level. Because of his own relentless insistence on total financial independence and the legally binding agreement he had personally forced me to sign, his legal team had absolutely no grounds to pursue any claim. He couldn't access a single dollar of my $3.2 million buyout because he had gone to great lengths to document in writing that every asset between us was entirely separate. Julian was compelled to sell his luxury vehicle, relocate to a cramped apartment on the outskirts of the city, and pick up a second job just to begin chipping away at his substantial investment debts. Eleanor's polished, condescending demeanor evaporated practically overnight as the realization set in that her calculated whispers had steered her beloved son directly into self-created financial ruin. Today, I'm settled into my beautiful new penthouse apartment with sweeping views of the city skyline, answering to absolutely no one but myself. They wanted a world where every person kept exactly what belonged to them. In the end, Julian received precisely that, his own hollow pockets and an entire mountain of regret waiting for him on the other side. What would your response have been if your partner suddenly demanded a strict 50-50 financial split purely out of spite? Share your perspective in the comments below. I've got 2 more compelling story videos queued up on screen right now that are guaranteed to catch you off guard with their twists. Thank you genuinely for staying with me all the way to the very end.